Sometimes, the most ordinary places hide the darkest moments. A diner, a waitress, a cup of coffee, small details that seem harmless. Yet, in seconds, these details can flip into something no one ever expected. A crowd gathers, silence falls, and every eye watches as one mistake turns into a storm no one saw coming. This story unfolds piece by piece, across time, generation after generation, until the truth of that one shocking moment is revealed. Before we continue, let us know in the comments where you are watching from today and what time you are currently watching this video. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. The small diner sat on the corner of a busy street in downtown Chicago. It wasn't fancy. The red booths had worn edges. The floor tiles carried years of footsteps, and the air smelled of bacon, butter, and fresh coffee. The neon sign outside blinked the word, open, even though it had lost its glow long ago. Inside, waitresses moved between tables, balancing plates stacked with pancakes and mugs of steaming coffee. The morning rush was loud, talking, laughter, the clatter of plates. Yet, on that day, the diner would become more than just a breakfast stop. At one corner table sat a man who didn't quite fit in with the crowd. He was tall, dressed in a simple black sweater and jeans, but there was something about him, an air of quiet power. His wristwatch alone could have paid for the meals of everyone in the diner. He was a billionaire, but no one knew his name yet. He preferred life in the shadows, far from flashing cameras. He had slipped in quietly that morning, hoping for an ordinary breakfast. But the moment he walked in, some eyes followed him, not because they knew who he was, but because he didn't look like he belonged in a place where coffee was $2 and tips barely kept the waitresses going. One waitress, in particular, noticed him. Her name was Cindy. She had worked at the diner for years, her face lined with exhaustion, her tone sharp as a knife. She had a reputation. Customers whispered about her bad attitude, but most ignored it because the food was cheap and the diner had history. Cindy didn't smile, she didn't bother with kindness, and that day, her bitterness burned hotter than the coffee she carried. The billionaire sat patiently, reading the menu even though he already knew he'd just ordered black coffee. He didn't eat much breakfast, but he liked to sit in places where no one expected him. To him, it was freedom. To Cindy, it was irritation. "Yeah," she said flatly, walking up to his table with a notepad she barely glanced at. "What'll it be?" He looked up, his voice calm. "Just a coffee, Black." Her eyes narrowed. She didn't like his tone, too composed, too confident. Something about him rubbed her the wrong way. She scribbled on the pad with more force than necessary and turned without another word. Around him, people talked and laughed, but a few noticed the exchange. They knew Cindy, and they could tell she was in one of her moods. The diner lived on drama sometimes, small incidents that gave regulars something to talk about. Minutes passed. The man sat quietly, scrolling through his phone. Cindy returned with a mug of steaming coffee, but instead of placing it gently on the table, she set it down hard. The liquid sloshed over the rim, dripping onto the table. The man looked up at her, not angry, but steady. His eyes held hers for a moment too long, and something inside her flared. "Problem?" she asked, her voice sharp. He shook his head slowly. "No problem." But the way he said it, the calmness, the control, felt like a challenge. Cindy hated people like that. She muttered under her breath and walked away, leaving him with the dripping cup. The crowd didn't know yet. They didn't know what was about to happen. The billionaire reached the mug, lifted it to his lips. He sipped, but the coffee was far too hot. He winced slightly, set it down. It wasn't unusual. Coffee in diners was always hot, but the way Cindy glanced back at him made it feel deliberate. Then it happened. As she passed by again, Cindy stopped abruptly beside his table. Without warning, without a word, she tilted the pot she carried and poured. The scalding liquid splashed over his hand, his sweater dripping down his chest. A gasp ran through the diner. Chairs scraped. Forks froze midair. The billionaire shot to his feet, the sting searing his skin. He inhaled sharply but didn't scream. His silence was louder than any shout could have been. The room froze, every eye on them. Cindy smirked slightly, as if daring him to react. "Oops," she said, though her tone carried no apology. The crowd stirred. Murmurs filled the air. People fumbled for their phones, some already recording. In that diner, in that moment, everyone knew this was no ordinary accident. The man stood tall, his jaw tight, his sweater clinging to him, soaked in hot coffee. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't lash out. Instead, he looked around the diner, his eyes moving over every face, as if memorizing them. Then he looked back at Cindy. What happened next shocked the crowd in a way none of them could have predicted. The diner was dead silent after the coffee spilled. You could hear the buzzing of the neon sign outside, the faint hum of the refrigerator behind the counter, even the nervous breath of a man sitting 2 tables away. No one moved, as if the entire room had been put on pause. The billionaire stood there, tall and unshaken. His sweater clung to him, dark with wetness, steam rising faintly where the hot liquid had burned through. Most men would have shouted, cursed, maybe even swung a fist. But not him. His silence made the scene heavier, more chilling than any outburst. Cindy, the waitress, stood with the empty pot still in her hand. She didn't even try to hide the smirk tugging at her mouth. Her eyes darted around, as though feeding off the crowd's tension. "What?" she asked finally, loud enough for everyone to hear. "It was an accident. He'll live." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. People shifted uncomfortably in their booths. Some leaned forward, others whispered, but not a single person left. They wanted to see what would happen next. The billionaire, still silent, took a napkin from the table and slowly dabbed at his soaked chest. His movements were deliberate, calm, almost too calm. At the booth across the room, an old man with a weathered face shook his head. "That ain't no accident," he muttered to his wife. She clutched her coffee cup tight, eyes locked on Cindy. The billionaire raised his gaze at last. His eyes locked on Cindy, steady and cold. "You did that on purpose," he said quietly. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the diner like a strike of thunder. Cindy flinched just a little, caught off guard by his calm certainty. Then she forced a laugh. "Don't flatter yourself," she snapped. "You're not that important." But the truth was, his presence was important, more than she or anyone else in that diner could realize. A young man, sitting near the counter, leaned closer to his friend. "You filming this?" he whispered. The friend nodded, his phone already raised, the camera pointed at the scene. In today's world, nothing stayed hidden, and this moment was no exception. The billionaire's calmness unsettled Cindy more than any anger could. She shifted her weight, gripping the coffee pot tighter, though it was empty now. "Look," she said with forced confidence, "if you don't like the service here, you can leave. Nobody's keeping you." But he didn't move. Instead, he pulled out his wallet, set a crisp $100 bill on the table, and said, "That's for the coffee." His voice was low, steady, but the weight of it pressed on every ear in the diner. Then, without another word, he stepped back, peeled off his wet sweater, and revealed a plain white shirt underneath, stained brown from the spill. The burns on his hand were red, angry against his dark skin, but he didn't show pain. He picked up his phone, glanced at the crowd, and started dialing. Cindy's smirk faltered. Something about the way he moved, the way he didn't yell, told her she had underestimated him. She opened her mouth to speak, but the ringing tone from his phone silenced her. The billionaire walked toward the door as the crowd parted like waves, their eyes glued to him. "Who do you think he's calling?" Someone whispered. "Lawyer. Another guest." "No," the old man muttered grimly. "That's a man who don't need a lawyer. That's a man who owns lawyers." The billionaire stopped at the doorway, phone to his ear. His deep voice carried just enough of the room to hear. "Yes, it's me. Send them here. Now." The diner erupted into low murmurs again, but no one dared follow him. He stepped outside, standing in the cool Chicago air, calm but fierce, as though the spill had awakened something much bigger. Through the glass windows, the crowd inside kept watching. Cindy tried to laugh again, but her voice shook this time. "What? He's just mad because he got his fancy shirt dirty. Big deal." She set the pot down and grabbed a towel, wiping at the counter in quick, nervous strokes. But the crowd wasn't buying her act anymore. One by one, phones came out. People began recording her, whispering, shaking their heads. The diner that had once been filled with the smell of pancakes now carried a new flavor, suspense, tension, and something like fear. Minutes later, the sound of tires screeched outside. 3 sleek black cars pulled up, their polished surfaces gleaming under the morning sun. The diner windows reflected them like mirrors. Doors opened and men in dark suits stepped out, their movements sharp and precise. They weren't police, but their presence was heavy, professional, undeniable. The crowd inside shifted uneasily, the whispers rising again. "Oh my God," someone breathed. "Who is this guy?" The suited men walked into the diner, their polished shoes clicking against the old tile floor. They didn't shout, they didn't demand. They simply scanned the room until their eyes found Cindy. Her face went pale. "What's this?" she barked, but her voice lacked the edge it had before. The men didn't answer her. Instead, they looked toward the door, waiting, and then the billionaire reappeared, stepping back inside with quiet authority. His expression hadn't changed, still calm, still collected, but now the entire diner understood that this was not just any man. Cindy swallowed hard, her bravado shrinking as he approached. "What's this supposed to be?" she said again, but it came out weaker, thinner. The billionaire stopped just a few feet away, his gaze locked on her. He didn't speak right away. The silence stretched, pressing on every chest in the diner, until the air itself felt heavy. Finally, he said, "You made a mistake." Cindy tried to scoff, but her voice cracked. "It was coffee. You're making a scene." But the crowd knew better now. This wasn't about coffee anymore. The billionaire's men spread out across the diner, their presence sharp, intimidating. The customers clutched their phones, caught between fear and fascination, unable to look away. Then, with one small motion, the billionaire pointed at Cindy. And in that instant, the diner held its breath. The diner was frozen. Forks and knives sat untouched. Cups of coffee cooled. And every pair of eyes followed the billionaire's hand as it pointed at Cindy. His men, sharp and silent, shifted slightly, their black suits making them stand out against a faded booze and greasy counter. The waitress, who once strutted with arrogance, now stood rigid, towel clutched in her hands, her smirk gone. For a moment, nothing happened. The only sound was a faint buzz of a ceiling fan, spinning slowly as though Eve was watching the drama unfold. Cindy licked her lips, her bravado collapsing under the billionaire's unblinking stare. "What is this?" She tried again, but her voice cracked, betraying her fear. The billionaire didn't answer right away. He stepped closer, slow and deliberate, the quiet power of a man who didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. When he finally spoke, his words were calm but heavy. "You don't know who I am, do you?" Cindy hesitated, her eyes darting from his burned hand to men in suits standing like statues around the diner. "I don't care who you are," she spat, though her voice trembled. "You're just another customer. You come in here, sit in my section, and act like you own the place." The billionaire tilted his head slightly, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Act like I own the place?" His voice was low, almost amused. "I don't act, Cindy. I do." Gasps rippled through the diner. The regulars leaned closer to one another, whispering. Nobody had expected this. People knew rich men existed, but no one thought one of them would be sitting in this rundown diner in Chicago, drinking cheap coffee. From a corner booth, the old man who had been watching the whole time muttered, "Knew it. Knew he wasn't just some regular guy." Cindy's face tightened. Her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it by gripping the towel harder. "You think money scares me?" she snapped. "I've worked this job for 20 years. I've seen all kinds of people walk through that door. You think you're special just because you've got a suit and some men in black cars." The billionaire's eyes narrowed. "No," he said firmly. "I'm not special, but I am someone you shouldn't have poured coffee on." The crowd held its breath. His men didn't move, but the tension they carried filled every corner of the diner. Cindy tried to laugh, a dry sound that fooled no one. "So what? You're going to ruin my life because of a cup of coffee." The billionaire took one step closer. The towel slipped from her hand and dropped to the floor. "No," he said coldly. "Not because of the coffee. Because of the disrespect." Those words sent a chill through the room. They weren't loud, but they echoed with weight, leaving Cindy speechless. From the back, a man in a work shirt raised his hand nervously. Hey, maybe we should all just calm down here. No need to make this bigger than it is." His voice cracked, and he quickly shrank back into his booth when one of the suited men turned and looked at him. The billionaire finally turned his gaze from Cindy and scanned the diner. "All of you," he said slowly, "saw what happened." His voice carried, steady and commanding. "You saw the way she treated me. You saw the way she laughed." Dozens of heads nodded cautiously. Nobody dared deny it. Cindy's face flushed red. "What? You're going to make a show out of me? You think everyone's on your side just because you've got money? These people don't care about you." She looked around, desperate for support, but the crowd avoided her eyes. They weren't about to side with her now, not after what they'd seen. The billionaire leaned closer, his voice dropping low enough that only she could hear. "You made a mistake thinking no one cared who I was. Now, everyone does." Cindy swallowed hard. For the first time that morning, she realized she had lost control of the room. The smirks, the sharp comments, the tough act, none of it mattered anymore. The balance had shifted, and now the entire diner hung on his words, not hers. The billionaire straightened, turning to one of his men. "Make the call," he said simply. The man nodded, pulling out his phone immediately. Cindy's stomach dropped. "The call? What call? What's going on?" She glanced at the crowd, panic finally cracking through her anger. "You people gonna let this happen? You gonna sit there and watch him threaten me?" But no one spoke. No one moved. They were caught between fear of the man in front of them and curiosity about what would happen next. Moments later, the sound of police sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Cindy's eyes widened. "You called the cops?" she asked, voice high-pitched with disbelief. The billionaire shook his head. "No, I don't need the police." The crowd turned toward the windows. The sleek cars outside remained still, but now another vehicle, a long, black SUV, pulled up. The driver stepped out, opened the back door, and out came a man in a gray suit with a leather briefcase. He adjusted his tie and walked toward the diner with purpose. Cindy's chest tightened. "Who's that?" she demanded, but no one answered. The man with the briefcase entered the diner, calm and composed. He walked directly to the billionaire, handed him a document, and whispered something in his ear. The billionaire nodded once, then turned back to Cindy. "Do you know what this is?" he asked, holding up the papers. She shook her head, her breath coming quick and shallow. "It's the deed to this diner," he said. The entire diner erupted into whispers, gasps, and shocked murmurs. Cindy's face drained of color. "You're lying," she stammered. "That's not possible. You can't just—" The billionaire cut her off, his voice calm but firm. "When you poured that coffee, Cindy, you didn't just burn me. You burned the last thread of patience I had. I don't need to yell. I don't need to fight. I don't even need to call the cops. All I have to do is own." The papers slapped lightly onto the counter in front of her. The billionaire's men stood tall. The crowd held its breath, and Cindy stared at the documents as though they were snake-coiled and ready to strike. And in that diner, on that quiet Chicago morning, everyone knew this wasn't just about coffee anymore. It was about power, and Cindy had just lost hers. The diner had never been that quiet before. People who had come for pancakes and bacon now sat stiff in their booths, their meals forgotten, eyes darting between Cindy and the billionaire. The stack of documents on the counter glared at Cindy like a spotlight, the bold letters at the top reading, "Property Ownership Transfer." Her hands shook as she stared at the papers. This is a trick," she stammered, her voice sharp but weak. "You can't just walk in here and—" The billionaire cut her off. His voice was calm, steady. "This diner was already for sale. Cindy, quietly, your boss needed out. He didn't tell you because he knew you'd explode. But now I own it, as of this morning." Gasps spread across the room. Some of the regulars exchanged stunned looks. "I knew Frank was planning to sell," one woman whispered, "but I didn't know it was this serious." Cindy's face turned pale. Her voice rose desperate. "You're lying. Frank would have told me." The man in the gray suit with a briefcase spoke for the first time. "Frank signed last night. The ink is dry. This diner is no longer his." Cindy's jaw dropped. She grabbed the papers, scanning them frantically. The signatures, the stamps, the official seal, it was all there. Her knees buckled slightly, and she leaned against the counter for support. The billionaire didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply stood tall, watching her unravel in front of everyone. His burned hand still stung, but he ignored it. The pain was nothing compared to the quiet satisfaction of control. Cindy slammed the papers down, her anger returning in a burst. "So what? You own the building. Big deal. That doesn't mean you own me." The billionaire stepped closer, his voice low. "It means everything that happens here now goes through me. And you," his eyes pierced hers, "you've made yourself the center of it all." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Phones were still recording, every angle capturing the downfall of the woman who had once ruled the diner with her sharp tongue and rude attitude. From the back booth, a teenage boy whispered, "This is better than TV." His mother hushed him, eyes wide with fear that someone might hear. Cindy's chest heaved. She looked around the room, desperate for someone, anyone, to take her side. But all she found were cold stares and shaking heads. She had snapped at too many customers, made too many enemies. Nobody wanted to defend her now. Her voice broke. "You can't just take my job away. This diner is all I have." The billionaire paused, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to his men and gave a single nod. One of them stepped forward, pulling a smaller envelope from his coat pocket and placing it gently on the counter. "What's that?" Cindy demanded, her voice sharp with panic. The billionaire's tone softened, though it carried the same weight. "That's your severance pay. More money than you've seen in a year. Enough to walk away quietly. Enough to start over." The envelope sat between them like a loaded gun. Cindy stared at it, her face twisted in conflict. Pride fought with desperation in her eyes. "I don't want your money," she spat, though her trembling hands betrayed her. "You think you can buy everything. You think because you've got money, you can walk in here and control people's lives." The billionaire leaned forward slightly, his voice like steel. "No, Cindy, I don't think I can buy everything, but I know I can buy this diner. And now I decide who stays and who leaves." The silence that followed was suffocating. Cindy's eyes darted to the crowd again, but their expressions told her the truth. Her reign of rudeness was over. Suddenly, the diner door swung open, and Frank, the former owner, stepped inside. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair messy, as though he'd been dragged out of bed. His eyes scanned the room, landing on Cindy first, then the billionaire. "Cindy," he sighed, his voice heavy. "It's true." She froze. "Frank." "No. Tell them this is a mistake." Frank shook his head slowly. "It's no mistake. I sold it. I was drowning in debt. This man gave me an offer I couldn't refuse. The place is his now." Cindy's face crumbled. She took a step back, her shoulders slumping. "But you didn't even warn me." Frank's eyes softened, but his voice carried regret. "Because I knew you'd make a scene, just like you are now." The crowd murmured, watching as Cindy's world collapse around her. Her pride had been her armor for years, but now it was cracked, leaving her exposed. The billionaire straightened, his presence filling the room. "Cindy," he said firmly, "you poured hot coffee on me in front of everyone here. You mocked me. You disrespected every customer you've ever served. This diner deserves better. These people deserve better. Cindy shook her head wildly, tears brimming in her eyes. No, you can't do this. This is my life. The billionaire's gaze hardened. You made your choice when you poured that coffee. The crowd whispered, their voices low but sharp. Some nodded in agreement. Others simply stared, unable to believe how fast everything had changed. Cindy's hands clenched into fists. Her pride screamed at her not to take the envelope, not to walk away defeated. But her body shook, her voice trembled, and for the first time in her life, she realized she was powerless. Slowly, painfully, she reached for the envelope. Her fingers brushed against it, then snatched it up. She clutched it to her chest, her eyes burning with hatred and humiliation. The billionaire didn't flinch. He watched her, silent and steady, as if daring her to make another mistake. Cindy's voice cracked. You think this is over? You think you've won? The billionaire leaned forward slightly, his words sharp and chilling. This isn't about winning. This is about respect. And today, you learn the cost of disrespect. Cindy's face twisted with rage, but she didn't speak again. She shoved past one of the suited men, stormed toward the door, and yanked it open so hard it slammed against the wall. The bell above it jingled violently as she disappeared into the street. The diner stayed silent for a long moment after she left. Every eye turned back to the billionaire, waiting to see what he would do next. He picked up the ownership papers from the counter, tapped them once against the wood, and said simply, "This place has new rules now." And with that, the tension in the room shifted again, this time, towards something bigger, something the crowd couldn't yet understand. The bell above the diner door finally stopped jingling after Cindy stormed out, but the silence she left behind still clung to the room like smoke. Everyone sat stiff, their eyes darting between the billionaire and the papers in his hand. The air was thick with tension, but underneath it all was something else. Curiosity. The billionaire didn't rush. He stood calmly, tapping the ownership papers once against the counter before slipping them neatly into the briefcase his lawyer still held open. His burned hand stung every time he moved, but he didn't show it. His calm control made the room feel even smaller, as though every person inside was under his gaze. "Listen carefully," he said finally, his voice low but commanding. "This diner is under new ownership. My ownership. From this moment on, things will change here." A nervous laugh broke out from the back, where a truck driver sat hunched over his half-eaten eggs. "What? You're gonna serve fancy steak now? Put wine on the menu?" His voice tried to cut the tension, but it cracked halfway through. The billionaire's eyes flicked toward him. "No," he said firmly. "This diner will stay what it's always been. Affordable, familiar, but it will no longer be a place where customers are mistreated, where staff feel untouchable, or where respect is optional." The lawyer stepped forward, placing another folder on the counter. "These are employee records," he announced. "From today forward, every staff member is under review." Whispers erupted across the diner. The remaining waitresses, two women who had kept their distance during Cindy's outburst, looked at one another nervously. One, a younger brunette named Lacey, swallowed hard and spoke up. "Sir, I didn't know she'd do that. None of us would ever." The billionaire raised a hand, silencing her. "This isn't about guilt by association. It's about accountability. If you treat people right, you have nothing to worry about." Lacey nodded quickly, relief washing over her face. From the crowd, a man leaned forward. "So, what's your plan here? You just gonna run a diner now? Doesn't seem like billionaire work." The billionaire's lips curled into a faint smile. Sometimes the smallest places reveal the biggest truths. This isn't just about a diner. It's about a principle. The crowd shifted again, sensing the weight of his words. Phones were still recording, lenses catching every move, every statement. This moment was no longer just happening inside the diner. It was already spilling out into the world. Outside, a small crowd had begun to gather on the sidewalk. Passers-by stopped, curious about the black cars, the suited men, and the whispers of what had just happened inside. Through the window, they pressed closer, peering in, trying to get a glimpse. Inside, the billionaire turned back to the customers. "For too long, places like this have relied on people like Cindy. Rude, careless, disrespectful. People who think they can treat others badly because no one will stop them." He let the words sink in before continuing. "That ends today. Not just here, but everywhere I choose to set foot." The old man in the corner, who had been watching everything closely, spoke up. His voice was gravelly but steady. "So what happens now, son? You fire her, take the diner, make a speech. Then what?" The billionaire's eyes met his. There was respect in the way he answered. "Now I build, and I make an example out of what happened here today." The old man nodded slowly, as though he understood more than the rest. At the counter, one of the suited men stepped forward. "Sir, the press is already outside. They're asking questions." Gasps filled the room. Cindy's outburst, the takeover, the documents, it all happened so fast. But word was spreading faster. The billionaire exhaled slowly, his calm never faltering. Let them in. The room tensed as the door opened again. This time, it wasn't angry footsteps, but flashing cameras and booming voices. Reporters pushed their way in, microphones raised, questions firing like bullets. Sir, what happened here? Why this diner? Is it true you were assaulted by a waitress? What are your plans with this business? The billionaire raised his burned hand slightly, showing the red mark still fresh from the coffee. The flashes exploded brighter. This, he said clearly, his voice cutting through the noise, wasn't about coffee. It was about respect. And I intend to make sure what happened here today doesn't happen anywhere else again. The reporters leaned closer, shouting follow-up questions, but he didn't answer. Instead, he walked back toward the center of the diner, placing his hand on one of the old wooden booths. This place, he continued, is where hard-working people come every day. They deserve better. And now they'll have it. His words echoed with finality. Customers who'd been silent for so long began to nod, some even clapping hesitantly. A wave of support spread through the room. But not everyone was convinced. From the back, a man in a leather jacket spoke up, his voice sharp. So you think buying one diner makes you a hero? You think people won't see this for what it is, just another rich man flexing his money to prove a point? The diner froze again, eyes shifting back to the billionaire. Slowly, he turned toward the man in the jacket. His face stayed calm, but his eyes were firm. No, he said, this isn't about being a hero. It's about showing people that power can be used differently, not just for profit, for change. The man in the jacket scoffed, but he didn't push further. The silence that followed carried weight, broken only when one of the reporters asked, "What happens to the waitress who poured the coffee?" The billionaire paused, his eyes flicking briefly toward the door Cindy had stormed through earlier. Then he turned back to the crowd. "She made her choice," he said finally. "Now she lives with it." The words were simple, but their weight was heavy. The customers exchanged uneasy glances, wondering if that really was the end for Cindy, or the billionaire's reach extended further than they realized. Outside, the crowd grew bigger, the sound of sirens faint in the distance as more police cars approached, not because the billionaire had called them, but because the news of the incident had spread like wildfire. Inside, the diner remained tense, every person knowing they had witnessed the start of something far bigger than spilled coffee. The billionaire straightened, gave one final look around the room, and said, "This story isn't finished. Not yet." And with that, the suspense in the diner deepened, leaving the crowd hanging on to every unspoken word. The reporters crowded around the diner, cameras flashing, microphones pushing forward, their voices rising like a storm. The billionaire stood tall in the center of it all, calm and unshaken, while the customers pressed back into their booths, trying to avoid the chaos. The diner, once just a greasy spoon on a corner in Chicago, had now become the center of attention. People outside pressed against the glass, trying to see, trying to hear. The buzz of voices grew, louder by the minute. Inside, the billionaire raised his hand. His burned palm caught the flashes again, the redness still raw. The noise dropped slightly, just enough for his voice to carry. "You all came here for a story," he said firmly, looking at the reporters. "You'll get one. But understand this. This isn't about wealth. This isn't about power. It's about a truth too many people ignore, how the smallest moments show who we really are." The room went silent. Reporters leaned closer. Customers, though trapped in their seats, listened like they were hearing something bigger than themselves. A young reporter at the front, notebook in hand, shouted, "Sir, are you saying this incident was planned? A setup?" The billionaire shook his head slowly. "No, it wasn't planned. But what she did," he motioned toward the door Cindy had stormed out of, "wasn't just an accident either. It was a choice. And choices have consequences." The words hung heavy in the room. People nodded. Some whispered. Others simply stared, realizing this wasn't going to be a one-day headline. It was the beginning of something larger. At the counter, Lacey, the younger waitress, wrung her hands nervously. She looked at the billionaire and finally spoke. "What's going to happen to us? To this diner?" He turned to her, his expression softening just slightly. "That depends on you. This place can thrive, or it can fall apart. But from now on, respect will be the rule here. No one gets treated the way I was treated this morning." Lacey nodded quickly, her voice trembling. "Yes, sir, we understand." The reporters scribbled furiously, recording every word. The flashes of cameras lit the walls like lightning. Then, suddenly, the door burst open again. All eyes whipped toward it, expecting Cindy to storm back in with another outburst. But it wasn't her. It was two police officers. They pushed inside, hands resting near their belts, scanning the crowded room. "We got calls about a disturbance," one of them announced. His voice was steady but sharp. The billionaire didn't move. He simply looked at them, calm as ever. "There was no disturbance," he said. "There was an assault, but it's already been handled." The officer's eyes narrowed. Handled how? The billionaire motioned to cameras, the witnesses, the ownership papers. You'll see soon enough. Every second was recorded. One officer raised a brow. So, you don't want to press charges? The billionaire's lips curved faintly, though it wasn't a smile. Not yet. The word stirred the room like a sudden chill. Not yet. It meant something more was coming. Something bigger than the coffee spill. The officers exchanged a glance but didn't push further. They knew when they were out of their depth. They nodded once and stepped aside, watching the scene unfold like everyone else. The billionaire returned his attention to the reporters. I'm not interested in revenge, he said clearly. I'm interested in change. And this diner will be the first step. The man in the leather jacket from earlier scoffed again, leaning back in his booth. Change? What? You're going to turn this place into some charity. You think buying diners and firing rude waitresses is going to fix the world? The billionaire's gaze shifted toward him, sharp and unwavering. No, but it'll send a message. And sometimes, a message is enough to start something bigger. The crowd stirred again. The old man in the corner, who hadn't spoken since earlier, finally leaned forward. Son, he said, his voice gravelly, you got their attention now, but attention fades. What happens when the cameras leave, when the crowd moves on? The billionaire's eyes met his, steady as ever. Then we make sure they don't forget. The old man nodded slowly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Then you're not just buying a diner. You're buying a fight. The billionaire didn't deny it. He simply let the silence settle again, knowing the truth had already been spoken. Outside, the crowd had grown even larger. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes raised toward the sky. More police cars pulled up, not to intervene but to control the swelling crowd. People chanted, shouted questions, held up phones. The diner was now on the map, its neon, open sign flickering like a beacon. Inside, the tension hadn't left. Lacey and the other waitress whispered nervously behind the counter. Customers sat frozen, unsure if they should leave or stay, their meals long forgotten. The reporters pressed closer, hungry for more. And then, the door slammed open once again. This time it was Cindy. Her hair was messy, her eyes wild, her cheeks streaked red. She stormed in, pointing a finger straight at the billionaire. You think you can just ruin me? You think you can take everything from me and walk away like some hero? The crowd gasped. Phones raised higher. Reporters shouted her name, cameras flashing. The billionaire didn't flinch. He turned to face her fully, his calmness unshaken. Cindy's voice cracked as she shouted, This is M.Y. Place. My life. You don't belong here. You never did. Her words echoed in the diner, heavy with rage and desperation. The billionaire stepped forward, his voice steady and chilling. No, Cindy, this place was never yours. And today, everyone sees the truth. Cindy's face twisted, her fists clenched at her sides. She looked ready to explode, her body trembling with fury. The crowd braced, unsure what she would do next. But before she could take another step, one of the billionaire's men moved forward, blocking her path. The tension hit its peak, every eye wide, every breath caught in throats. The diner felt like it was about to crack open. The diner had turned into a furnace of tension. Cindy's face burned with anger, her hands shaking, her chest rising and falling quickly as though she had run miles. The billionaire stood unmoving, his calmness making her rage boil even hotter. The man in the black suit, one of the billionaire's security men, blocked her path, his broad shoulders square, his expression unreadable. He didn't raise a hand toward her, but his presence alone was enough to stop her from lunging. Cindy spat the words out, sharp and venomous. You think you can humiliate me? In my own place? In front of all these people? The billionaire's voice was low, but it cut through the noise like steel. You humiliated yourself. And the cameras caught everything. Every word. Every action. You made the choice. Now you face the consequences. Gasps rolled across the room. Reporters scribbled faster, their cameras clicking. Customers leaned in whispering, watching Cindy unravel in front of the world. Her breathing grew ragged, and she glanced around the room. Everywhere she looked, she saw phones raised toward her, recording her face, her rage, her downfall. Her lips trembled. You don't understand. You can't just take my life away with words. The billionaire tilted his head slightly. No, Cindy, you did that yourself. The silence was suffocating. Cindy looked cornered, like a wild animal surrounded on all sides. And then she snapped. She lunged. Her hands reached forward, aiming not for the billionaire's face, but for his burned hand. The crowd screamed. Reporters stumbled backward. Chairs scraped against the floor, and the billionaire's security man reacted instantly. He caught Cindy's arm midair, twisting it just enough to stop her, without breaking it. Cindy cried out, her voice shrill and broken. The cameras flashed wildly, capturing the moment. The billionaire did not flinch, even as she struggled against a grip that held her still. "Let me go," she shouted. "This is M.Y. Diner. My name is on the papers, not his." Her words echoed, but the billionaire finally raised a hand, motioning for a security man to release her. Reluctantly, the man let go, and Cindy staggered back, rubbing her wrist. The billionaire's voice was firm. "Not anymore. Look at the documents again. Cindy, the ownership changed hours ago. Legally. Permanently. The only thing left with your name on it is the incident report and the videos of what you did." Cindy froze. Her eyes widened as the reality sank in. She looked from the billionaire to the reporters, to the flashing cameras, to the customers who avoided her gaze. The weight of the truth pressed down on her shoulders. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no. This can't be happening." The billionaire stepped closer. "It already has." The silence broke with a shout from the crowd outside. The chants had started now, voices rising in rhythm. "Justice! Justice! Justice!" The sound poured through the diner walls, rattling the windows, shaking Cindy to her core. She stumbled toward the counter, gripping it for support, her breath shallow and fast. Her world, the diner she thought she ruled, was collapsing around her. And then the old man in the corner spoke again. His voice, rough and steady, cut through the chaos. "Cindy, listen. You had a chance to run this place right, but you poisoned it with your bitterness. Now look where you are. Look what you've done." Cindy's head snapped toward him, her eyes blazing. "Don't lecture me. You sat there every day, sipping coffee, never tipping enough, never saying a word to defend me." The old man didn't flinch. "Because you never earned it." Her mouth opened, but no sound came. The room was watching her crumble, piece by piece. The billionaire didn't push further. He simply turned back to the reporters. "You've seen everything you need. The story doesn't end here, but for today, this is enough." But before the reporters could swarm him again, a voice rose from the back of the diner. A young man, maybe 25, stood from his booth. His baseball cap was low on his head, and his phone still recorded. "Wait," he said loudly. "What happens to us? The customers? We came in for food, not a political show." The billionaire's gaze met his. "And you'll get more than food. You'll get a place where respect is served with every meal. That starts now." The young man smirked faintly. "Sounds good, but talk is easy. Action's harder." The billionaire's lips curved, almost into a smile. "Then watch closely. You'll see action." The young man sat back, but his phone never lowered. Meanwhile, Cindy's breathing grew heavier. Her eyes darted toward the back exit, the one near the kitchen. She inched toward it slowly, hoping no one would notice. But the cameras followed every step, and the billionaire's eyes locked on her like a hawk. "Running won't change the truth," he said coldly. She froze mid-step. Her shoulders slumped, her strength drained away. The billionaire motioned toward the counter. "Sit down, Cindy. For once in your life, listen instead of shouting." And for the first time, Cindy obeyed. She sank into a chair, her face pale, her hands trembling. The reporters shifted their attention between her and the billionaire, sensing that the story had reached another level. This wasn't just about a coffee spill anymore. It was about power, pride, downfall, and a clash between arrogance and restraint. The billionaire adjusted his jacket, standing taller. His voice filled the diner once more. "This place isn't closing. Not today. Not tomorrow. But it will change. The staff will change. The service will change. And what happened here today will be remembered as the moment it all began." The crowd outside roared louder, their chants shaking the glass. "Justice! Justice! Justice!" Inside, people exchanged looks. Some nodded. Some smiled faintly. Others simply sat in silence, knowing they had just witnessed something larger than themselves. And Cindy? She sat hunched over, her eyes down, her breath shallow. Her kingdom was gone, her voice drowned out by the weight of truth and the roar of the crowd. But deep inside her eyes, behind the shame and the fear, there flickered something else, something darker, something that made the entire diner hold its breath. Because Cindy wasn't finished yet, not by a long shot. The diner was buzzing with tension. People whispered, cameras clicked, and the chants outside only grew louder, shaking the glass as though the walls themselves were trembling. Cindy sat hunched at the counter, pale and silent, but her eyes never stopped moving. Every so often, she glanced at the billionaire, then at the door, then at the cameras pointed toward her. She looked cornered, but there was something in her stare, something restless, plotting. The billionaire, calm as ever, addressed the room again. "This is not just about one woman's actions. This is about how people in this country treat one another. It's about respect, dignity, and what happens when those things are ignored." Reporters scribbled every word. Customers leaned closer, some nodding, some whispering, some shaking their heads. One reporter, a tall woman with sharp eyes and a voice that carried, called out, "Sir, are you pressing charges against her?" The room froze. Cindy's head shot up. The billionaire paused before answering, his tone steady. Not today. The law will handle what it must. But what happened here goes beyond legal consequences. It's about change. Murmurs spread through the diner. Some agreed, others frowned, but all eyes stayed fixed on Cindy. Cindy's hands clenched on the counter. She whispered under her breath, "Change? You think you can take everything from me and call it change?" Her voice cracked. She pushed away from the counter, suddenly, standing on shaky legs. "You people don't know me. You don't know what I've given to this place." Her voice rose higher. "I worked double shift for years to keep these doors open. When the roof leaked, it was me who stayed late with a bucket. When the fryer broke, it was me who fixed it. And now you all sit there judging me? Like you're better?" The diner went silent. Her chest heaved, her eyes glossy with anger and desperation. The old man in the corner finally spoke, his voice rough but calm. "You kept the doors open, Cindy, but you closed your heart. That's what ruined you." Her head snapped toward him, fury flaring again. "You shut your mouth. Old man, you don't know what it's like to carry everything on your back while people spit in your face." The billionaire raised his hand slightly, steadying the room again. "Enough," he said firmly. "No one here denies the work you put in, but the way you treated people. That is what tore this place apart. And today, the world saw for themselves." Cindy trembled, her breathing ragged. She turned her glare on him. "You think you've won? You think buying this place makes you some kind of savior? You don't belong here. You don't belong with people like us." The billionaire met her stare calmly. "I belong anywhere I choose to stand, just like anyone else." The word stung. Cindy's face twisted. She looked around the diner, searching for someone, anyone, to back her up, but no one moved. No one spoke, not even the staff, who stood frozen behind the counter. That silence broke her. Her voice cracked as she shouted, "You're all cowards." Her hands slammed down on the counter, rattling the coffee cups. For a moment, it looked like she might leap at him again, but she stopped. Something flickered in her eyes. Something different this time. Not rage, not shame, determination. She leaned forward, her voice lower now, but sharp enough to cut the air. "This isn't over. You might own this place on paper, but you'll never own me. You'll never erase me." The billionaire studied her for a long moment before answering, his tone steady. "You're right. I don't need to erase you. You'll do that yourself if you keep down this path." The crowd murmured again. The tension felt like it could snap at any second. And then, without warning, Cindy bolted. She ran toward the kitchen doors, her shoes slapping the tile floor. Gasps and shouts filled the diner. Reporters fumbled with their cameras, trying to keep up. The billionaire security man moved instantly, rushing after her. But Cindy was quick, quicker than anyone expected. She shoved open the swinging kitchen doors and disappeared inside. The room erupted in noise. "She's running!" someone shouted. Reporters dashed forward. Customers craned their necks, and the billionaire remained still, his eyes narrowing. The security man burst through the kitchen doors after her. For a tense moment, the diner waited in silence, listening for any sign of what was happening in the back. Pots clattered. Something heavy crashed. A pan hit the ground. Then silence. The crowd held its breath. Moments later, the security man reemerged, breathing hard, his shirt stained with something dark from the kitchen. He shook his head. "She's gone. Back exit." Gasps filled the air. Phones rose again, recording every word. The billionaire's jaw tightened, but his calm never wavered. "Then let her run. She can't outrun the truth." Outside, the chants grew louder. Reporters rushed toward the doors, desperate to see if Cindy had escaped into the crowd. Inside, the customers whispered among themselves. Some looked uneasy, some looked relieved, but all of them knew this wasn't over. The old man in the corner leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the billionaire. "You've stirred something big today, son. Bigger than coffee. Bigger than this diner." The billionaire gave a faint nod. That was always the point. But even as he said it, there was a heaviness in the air. Cindy was gone, but the look in her eyes before she ran lingered in everyone's memory. She wasn't finished. She was planning something. And deep down, everyone in that diner felt it. This storm was only beginning. The diner felt heavier without Cindy inside, like the air itself had thickened. The customers whispered in hushed tones. The reporters jotted notes furiously, and outside the chants of the crowd shook the windows. But everyone's mind was on the same question. Where had she gone, and what would she do next? The billionaire remained seated at the center of it all, calm, collected, but focused. His bodyguard stood near the door, scanning every shadow, every face, every sound from the street outside. The tension in the room was sharp enough to cut with a knife. Minutes crawled by, then the glass door swung open with a bang. Cindy stormed back inside. Her apron was gone, her hair wild, her face pale but burning with anger. In her hands, she clutched a folder, paper spilling from its sides. Everyone turned toward her, phones rising instantly, ready to capture whatever came next. The billionaire's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't move. "You came back," he said, voice even. Her voice shook, not from fear, but from rage. "You think you know me. You think you understand this place. But you don't. You don't know the sacrifices I made, the debts I paid, the nights I went hungry so this diner would survive." She raised the folder, waving it in the air. "These are the bills, the foreclosure notices, the loans I begged for when no one else cared. I bled for this diner. And then you walked in here with your fancy suit and money, and now I'm the villain." Her voice cracked as she slammed the folder down on a table. Papers scattered across the floor like broken pieces of her life. The crowd stirred. Reporters scribbled faster. Cameras zoomed in. Customers shifted uneasily. The billionaire finally stood, his tall figure commanding the room. "You worked hard. No one denies that," he said firmly. "But hard work doesn't excuse cruelty. No one forced you to pour coffee on me. No one forced you to treat people with disrespect. That was your choice." The room fell silent again. Cindy's lips trembled. Her fists clenched at her sides. Then she spat out, "You humiliated me in front of the world. And now you'll see what humiliation feels like." Before anyone could react, Cindy lunged toward the counter, grabbing the same coffee pot she'd used earlier. She yanked it up, the hot liquid sloshing inside, and in one swift motion, she swung it toward the billionaire. Gasps erupted. Chairs screeched as people scrambled back. But this time, the billionaire moved first. He stepped aside smoothly, quicker than anyone expected, and the pot slipped from Cindy's grip. It crashed to the floor, shattering into pieces, steaming coffee splattering across the tiles. The security man rushed forward, pinning Cindy's arms before she could grab anything else. She thrashed, screamed, tried to break free, but the strength had drained from her. "Let me go," she shouted, her voice echoing through the diner. "He doesn't belong here. None of you see it. He's using you." Her words rang out, but they no longer carried the same weight. The crowd had seen enough. The billionaire stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. "No, Cindy, what people see now is the truth. You're not a victim. You're a person who let anger rule her choices." She froze, chest heaving, eyes burning with something between fury and defeat. Police sirens wailed outside. The flashing red and blue light spilled through the diner's glass windows, painting the room in streaks of color. A moment later, 2 officers pushed through the crowd, their hands ready on their belts. The security man released Cindy into their custody. She didn't resist this time. Her head dropped as the officers led her toward the door. The crowd stayed silent, watching as she was taken outside, the chants from the protesters mixing with the sound of camera shutters snapping nonstop. Just before the door closed behind her, Cindy twisted her head back toward the billionaire. Her voice cracked, almost a whisper, but it carried to the quiet diner. This isn't the end. Then she was gone. The diner exhaled as one. Conversations erupted all at once. People talking over each other, reporters shouting questions, customers shaking their heads. The billionaire, however, simply sat back down at his booth. His calmness contrasted the storm swirling around him. One reporter finally broke through the noise. "Sir, after everything that's happened today, what do you want people to take from this?" The billionaire's gaze swept the room, his voice measured. "That respect is not optional. That no matter how much money you have, or how little, every person deserves dignity. And when that dignity is denied, change will come. Sometimes loudly, sometimes quietly, but it will come." The old man in the corner nodded slowly, his voice carrying through the crowd. "And we all saw it today." The customers murmured in agreement. Even those who had stayed quiet before now nodded, their eyes heavy with thought. The billionaire's words lingered in the air like smoke. The cameras kept flashing, capturing every second, every detail. Then, just when the noise started to rise again, something unexpected happened. The owner of the diner, an older woman who had been silent through the entire ordeal, finally stepped forward. Her face was weary but strong, her apron stained from years of work. She looked at the billionaire, then at the scattered papers on the floor, then back at the crowd. Her voice trembled at first, but grew steady. This diner was never just about food. It was about community. But somewhere along the way, we lost that. What happened here today proves it. It's time to rebuild, not just the walls, but the way we treat each other. The crowd quieted again, listening. The billionaire gave her a respectful nod. "You won't rebuild it alone," he said. "I'll help, not as the billionaire you all know me as, but as a man who cares about what this place could stand for." The owner's eyes softened, and for the first time that day, the tension in the room eased. The cameras clicked one final time. The story had reached its climax, but its impact was only beginning to spread. And as a police car carrying Cindy pulled away outside, the people inside the diner knew one thing for certain. What they had just witnessed would echo far beyond these walls. The rude act, the shocking retaliation, the crowd silence, and the billionaire's calm words had all combined into a story that would be told for years. A story that began with hot coffee and ended with the world watching. If you like this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. also and other to strengthen our community. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from and what time you are currently watching this video.